I'm going to talk a little bit about a essay I wrote that's been published in Elephant Journal, an online journal, and go through it. It's on desire, and basically how it's misunderstood. The disciplines concerning it is often misunderstood. So I'll read it and we'll talk about it as we read. So here we go. The title of the article is What the Buddha Didn't Mean. The first paragraph goes like this. The Buddha's essential message is, in a nutshell, end suffering and attain enlightenment. The suffering the Buddha was speaking of is attachment, grasping, and craving, all the offspring of desire. The logical implication would be that if desire is destroyed, suffering would end. But that is not what the Buddha meant. What he meant was that if we were not led about by our desires, suffering would end, which does not imply that desire is the cause of suffering. So this first paragraph, I'm basically talking about, that when we think of what the Buddha taught, and many of the other, religions taught, it's that desire is some sort of bad guy that, you can't have, and you can't fulfill your desires and so forth, which is true and false, but we usually, rebel against religion for certain reasons, and one of them is that we don't like to be controlled, which we're going to get into a little more as we investigate. So the next paragraph will illustrate a little bit more about how desire is misconstrued from a religious perspective, from a perspective of a person that's seeking to approach the spiritual life, and how often he's thinking that somehow he's supposed to be sort of like a robot or something with no desires. So here we go. Second paragraph. The misunderstanding lies in our jumping to the unwarranted conclusion that desire is the bad guy, a common attitude whenever the discourse turns to precepts. We feel threatened by any outside interference with our lives. A perfectly natural response, and a familiar one. Ever since, as children, we balked at our parents' commands. So, again, we think, religion portrays desire as the bad guy, but it doesn't. So let's go on to the third paragraph. Rebellion is a built-in response embedded in us due to our love for independence. Unfortunately, however, it often obscures the message, which is, if we pause long enough to see, might bring to light its reasonableness. A child busy at play may block out his mother's pleas to eat, but if he didn't eat, he would have no energy for play. So basically, like we think that, when we have to, that there's nothing that we're going to get out of, that the call for observing precepts against greed, lavish, satisfaction of cravings and so forth, is like sort of like a putting us in some sort of prison, not being able to fulfill our cravings, but we're not really seeing the intention of getting the intention right. So the fourth paragraph goes, Children don't have desire for sex, wealth, fame, and so forth, and are more malleable in many ways than adults. But as adults, our appetite for objects of desire are irresistible, and intrusion on them is perceived as a threat to our sovereignty. This is the case when teachings regarding desire, the spiritual teachings, are construed as restrictions upon our way of life, particularly the pursuit of sex, wealth, and material things we crave. So this again illustrates what I spoke of a moment ago, that you know we don't like you know our desires, so forth, to be precepted, which religion seems to do. But we're going to get at that's not really what it does in the next few paragraphs, particularly this one right now. So we're on the fourth paragraph now. There's a link to get to this article so that you can read it online if you want. But we're reading it. The fourth paragraph, or the fifth paragraph, says the Buddha never said that desire is bad. He only said that its unwise pursuit may mask something better. Most of us are not enlightened. We are children playing in the playground of desire. What other playground is there? If there is any restriction at all, it will be in the playground we are in. The Buddha knew this, and his teaching is not about some other world out there, but in the desire realm where we are. He doesn't think we know how to play in this realm very well. So in other words, the Buddha is saying that, all you kids, we're all kids, basically, compared to the Buddha and his understanding. You all kids, you don't know how to play in the playground of desire. He's not saying get out of the playground. He's saying learn how to play better, which we get into how to play better in this upcoming paragraph. So pay attention. This part is important. At least I think it's important. Maybe you don't think it's important. But it is. Okay, here we go. There are two ways to fulfill desires, a selfish way and an unselfish way. Which way we go depends on how we have habituated ourselves to go. Seeking selfish gratification binds us in jealousy, greed, grasping beyond our means. It is ironic that we protest the teachings of the precepted ones on the grounds that they impose restrictions when we bind ourselves infinitely more by our own conniving and seeking. If we want to be free, we don't have to abandon our desires, but we must realize that we create our own heaven or hell through desire and learn to play our hand better. So now we move to the next paragraph. I think we covered that pretty well. If we take a little time to consider what is reasonable, we will see that desire is either a friend or an enemy. It is like atomic energy that can light a city or destroy it. It will be a long, long while before we have no desire and are enlightened like the Buddha. But we can learn to avoid the traps of desire by making more enlightened use of our desires. So this gets at the crux of what this essay is about. It's about not getting rid of desires, so to speak, but not getting tangled up in them, not entangling ourselves. So in other words, getting rid of the selfishness part of our desires, because selfishness always destroys us, So there's a difference. What I'm talking about here is there's a difference between being selfish and pursuing desires and pursuing them in an unselfish way, where we're considering others and giving and really being, making, a a pursuit of desires that isn't selfish, It's not selfish gratification, it's a giving of ourselves. So, and so we're not, if we were enlightened like the Buddha, then, of course we wouldn't have these coarse animal-like desires that we have. But since we are not Buddhas, we do have desires. So we have to deal with them in a realistic way, not like an animal. We have the capacity to approach desire in an unselfish way. So the next paragraph gives a perspective of everything. We live in a far more sophisticated world than the Buddha did. Very few of the Buddha's listeners could read or write. Much was transmitted by memory from those who attended the teachings and spread to those who were not present. Nothing was written down at all until a decade or so after the Buddha's nirvana. Much was framed in black and white. This is good and that is bad, because that is what the people of the day could understand. From this black and white teaching emerged the Mahayana, the middle way teachings, which became the central teachings of the Buddha from about 1,000 years of his passing until today. The middle way teachings didn't say no sex, no money, no fine things, no fame, and so forth, but explained that we should recognize them as strong energies that we can harness to yield fulfillment, or that can bind us up in attachment. So the crux of the whole thing here is that, desires, when they're really used with intelligence and wisdom, can actually, really be enlightening. And if they're not, then we just turn and bind ourselves up by our cravings. We want this, we want that, we lust after this and lust after that, and wind up getting, caught up in a realm of seeking that, no matter how great accomplishment we have and how much we get, we cannot find satisfaction. That's why the highest suicide rate in the world is by very far, amongst wealthy people than very poor people. Poor people are trying to figure out how to survive. Wealthy people, are busy trying to kill themselves. So it's a strange dynamic. So, next paragraph. The Buddha never said separate from desire. The Buddha said separate from selfishness. The problem of being unselfish with respect to our desires is that selfishness cannot be switched off. It requires a transition from one mode of being to another. Transitioning from selfishness to unselfishness with respect to desire is what defines the foundation of the Buddha's teaching. Next paragraph. Some find the only way to transition is to become a monk or nun. But this is fraught with many problems, as we all know. The monastic approach is a regression to the black and white approach and does not reflect the middle way. As lay people, we are more capable of merging with the middle way view and transitioning from a selfish mode of fulfilling desires to an unselfish mode. So here we're just talking about, I'm using the example of a monk, but it could be you or me as lay people, not being too radical and trying to just block out desire and pretend it doesn't exist. It's the whole point is not to make it black and white, but to try and figure a middle way where we're not seeking and craving and grasping at things, but rather, fulfilling our desires without the stigma of craving things. You can eat food that'll sustain your life without eating food that you crave. And you can get to work in a car that, gets you there very nicely, but is not the, maybe the something that's going to draw a lot of attention to you. So it's about being a little wise in how we deal with our desires. And the monk's life where you just switch it all off, we've seen so many examples of that going wrong. So that's not what we want to do even as lay people. We don't want to just cut things off. We want to, find a way where we're not, a middle way between, extravagance and renunciation. And the next paragraph says, the idea of purity often is force-fed us as renunciation. But the Buddha never meant renunciation by purity. By purity meant being unselfish. He never said impurity was bad, but his teachings imply it obscures something better. A kid in the playground, always concerned about his toys, and even trying to appropriate the toys of others, will be bound up by his attitude, even if the entire playground were his. But the kid who has nothing owns the playground because he is happy just being in it. Us big kids can learn a lot from the little ones and suffer far less than we do by realizing how great life is when everything is ours. It already is, after all. So what is it we are looking for? So that concludes the talk, the essay. It's the essay I wrote. So I hope you read the essay too. But in case for those who don't like to read, I did this little video on it. And the link is with this video. So you can go where you clicked on the video. You can read it if you want. The link will take you there. Okay. Bye-bye.